Because one dog will say something, and then the other dog will say, "Oh, won't you come in?" And you have to keep combine them all. As usual. It's like floating.
Well, that's the nice thing about having a dog coach.
Yeah,
She'll help you keep track of all that.
she's really, she actually applied to the doctor for walkers now. So I applied for it.
Yeah, those four, some will come out.
Hopefully. I'm not gonna, I'm not sure. I should do one. I've been praying for, what's that?
That would be of us.
So I've been praying for it.
Appreciate that very much.
Okay. It's good. Good to see you.
You weren't supposed to do that.
I probably owed it to you already anyway.
I don't think so.
Maybe.
Don't remember. I would have come after you if you'd owed me $3.
For
I've
$3,
been all,
huh?
been all over you.
Could you sit over there for me? I guess you always sit. No, not on Wednesday nights. Though. Good to see you.
Is that what you take care of? Are you doing well?
I didn't read it.
Okay.
That's the certificate.
Okay. Is this for the check for Don? Yeah, good. How you doing? Yeah, everything's all right. I don't know if the microphone's on. We have to watch what we say. How's the Leggett family? Yeah? Doing pretty good? I guess this is on, so, okay. Test, test. Yep. Recording everything. Good evening, dear ones. Good to have you here. So we continue our study through the divided kingdom. Mostly this is a study of 2 Kings, but we're using 2 Chronicles as well in this period to flesh out some details for the good kings in Judah. 2 Kings follows the kings of Israel and Judah, and I guess most folks say they think it focuses on the kings of Israel, but it's covering both, and so we're working our way through that. I've got a few more of these. If you don't have one, it really will come in handy tonight. Anybody need one?
I'll take one for tonight and give it back to you.
Yeah, that's fine. Just to keep track, we're going to start going pretty fast. I don't know if you ever, in your youth, unwound a golf ball, but with all those windings in it, it goes really slow for a while, and then at the end it just goes, and it's done. It's just, at the end it's chaos, and that's where we are in this, especially with Israel. We're getting down to the end. After the kings that we'll see tonight, the Assyrians are going to come in and take them off into, well, we could say captivity, but it's not really captivity like Judah went into. It's more of destruction. They're more taken off salted with the other populations over which the Assyrians had control, never to really come back and be what they once were, like Judah was able to do after the captivity. So it kind of just referred to Israel as being destroyed by the Assyrians. And of course, that's part of how we get the Samaritans, but we'll talk about that too. Mark?
It seems like that the Assyrians relocated the Israelites in a lot of different areas, and I guess this may be part of where you get the diaspora from. That, you know, like for example in Acts 2, where you have all the people have come together for the Passover and they stayed through Pentecost. Why did they have to come? They had to come because they were all over the Mediterranean region. Mm-hmm. So apparently it may have been during this period that they were resettled in other areas, or it may have happened later, but they were spread all over the Mediterranean basin, all over that known world.
It's true. So we've studied this period. We're through this, the first 3 kings, 40 years each, Saul, David, and Solomon. Jeroboam then took 10 tribes and became the northern kingdom of Israel. Rehoboam took 2 tribes just because of the promise, and David's goodness. Was there anything left for the kingdom of Judah? They'd been pretty evil as well, or Rehoboam was going to be. We're in this period now, and we're going to study mostly tonight in the northern kingdom of Israel, so the top timeline. And you can see the colors there's a bunch of them, and they don't all go all the way across the timeline. And some of them just go for like a fraction. Shalom there, it looks like he's kind of a flash in the pan and never did have control over all of Israel, just a portion for a short period of time. So things are getting chaotic in this kingdom of Israel. Not so bad in the kingdom of Judah. You could still see the timelines there are fairly long, and so the time for each of these. We've just finished with Amaziah, and we're going to Azariah. And Azariah, if you take I'm not a Hebrew scholar, it probably couldn't even pick out the letters for you, but if you take the spelling of Azariah and just flip a couple of letters, it's Uzziah. And that's how Chronicles refers to him, as Uzziah. So Uzziah, Amaziah are the same person, and we're going to see that as we go on today. Of course, what's going to happen after this lesson, it'll be a couple of lessons until we actually read about the fall of Israel, but we'll watch Judah stand alone for a few hundred years, and then we'll see, 150 years, and then we'll see them fall to the captivity. So that's where we're headed. We're studying tonight Uzziah, and there's a real famous line in the call of Isaiah chapter 6. It begins, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord." And so we're talking about the time period of Isaiah at this time. And of course, Amos, Micah, contemporaries around this time. Over on the right, Jehu, Jehoahaz, Jehoash, Jeroboam II, Zechariah. Those are some that we're going to be going through. Also on to Shalom, Menahem, Pekahiah, and Pekah. And that'll finish them out tonight in 2 Kings chapter 15. So, let's see. Yeah, let's go ahead to 2 Chronicles chapter 26 is where we read quite a bit about Azariah, same guy. All the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king instead of his father Amaziah. he built Eloth and restored it to Judah after the king slept with his fathers. Uzziah was 16 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jechaliah of Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to all his father Amaziah had done. He set himself to seek God in the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. And as long as he sought the Lord, God made him prosper. That is a great memory verse and a great principle to understand. He set his heart, he set himself to seek God, and when he did that, while he was doing that, things went well for him. Unfortunately, he did not stay on that path, but that's how he began. And that's why we read of him, good things to say, we read about him in 2 Chronicles. So, he went out and made war against the Philistines, and he broke through the wall of Gath and the walls of the city of Jabneh and the wall of Ashdod. And so I just put a couple of those up on the map so you can see. Locate the Dead Sea in the east and then the Mediterranean in the west, and you can see we're right about at the level of the northern part of the Dead Sea, moving due west from there, out towards the coast. The Philistines are always on the coast. And so what's happening during this period is there's just a push back and forth, a constant, they'll take some cities, they'll give them back, and we'll take them back. And so they're constantly skirmishing, I guess you could say, skirmishing out there on the western frontier. But he gets some gains. And it says in verse 7, it wasn't just him. God helped him against the Philistines and against the Arabians who lived in Gerbaal and against the Maonites. The Ammonites paid tribute to Uzziah, and his fame spread even to the border of Egypt, for he became very strong. So a time of prosperity and a time of military prowess as well. As we go on, we see that. In verse 9, Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate and at the valley gate and at the angle and fortified them. He built towers in the wilderness and cut out many cisterns. The towers would be defensive in nature. The cisterns, general agricultural help. I mean, there's a defensive merit to having access to water as well, but I think this is more about just helping people, generally improving things. He had farmers and vine dressers in the hills and in the fertile lands, for he loved the soil. So he's given to agriculture. He cares about that. In verse 11, Uzziah had an army of soldiers fit for war in divisions according to the numbers. And it goes on and enlists all of them. Not only did he have an impressive army, but in verse 14, he prepared for all the army shields, spears, helmets, coats of mail, bows, and stones for slinging. So you think about those catapults or the trebuchet. I don't think the trebuchet goes back this far. But they were able to throw stones. And look in verse 15. I wonder what these machines look like. In Jerusalem, he made machines invented by skillful men to be on the towers and the corners to shoot arrows and great stones. So this is the first time that we've heard about machines shooting arrows and stones, kind of ushering in a new and different age, it seems like, in terms of warfare. His fame spread far, for he was marvelously helped till he was strong. But, did you know there was a but coming? In verse 16, but when he was strong, he grew proud to his destruction. So we have that great opening statement back in verse 5. When he sought the Lord, everything went well. But now he thinks he's all that, and he's not careful to seek the Lord anymore, and it leads to his destruction. For he was unfaithful to the Lord his God. And here's how, the main thing. Now remember, how many years did he reign? Do you remember the number? It was back at the start. 52 years, right, 52 years. So I don't know where in the 52 years this transition happens, that he's strong and now he doesn't care about the Lord anymore. And when in the 52 years he decides to do this, but he entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Is that something the king is supposed to do? Absolutely not. That's for the priests and the Levites to do that. That is not for the king to do. But he's all that. He figures he can do it. Now, Azariah the priest went in after him with 80 priests of the Lord who were men of valor. And they withstood the king Uzziah and said to him, "It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense. Go out of the sanctuary. You've done wrong. It will bring you no honor from the Lord God." I don't know what you're expecting to get out of this, but it's not going to be a lift. You know, you're not going to get anything good stepping into the function of the priest as the king. I guess nobody in his court is going to tell him he's doing wrong, but the priests stand right up and they say, "You shouldn't be in here, you need to leave." Well, he didn't like to hear that in verse 19. He was angry, and he had a censer in his hand to burn incense. And if you could have just been a fly on the wall, some of these miracles, it would be interesting. But he's angry, and he's getting angry with the priest, and he's standing there with the censer, and on his forehead, in the presence of the priest, they're the ones who can diagnose whether that's leprosy or not. Right in front of them, the leprous spot breaks out. And that's it now. There's no arguing about that. Leprosy, unclean, you're not among the people anymore. And so, you know, the bums rush now. They just, at this point, Azariah, the chief priest, verse 20, and all the priests looked at him. Behold, he was leprous in his forehead. They rushed him out quickly. He hurried himself to go out because the Lord had struck him. No doubt about why this just happened at this time. God had done that. And King Uzziah was a leper to the day of his death. And being a leper, he lived in a separate house. He was excluded from the house of the Lord. Couldn't go back there anymore. Not even to visit because of his leprosy. And Jotham, his son, reigned in his place. So, that's that. Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I mean, ostensibly he's going in, offering incense to God to serve God, but he's going to disobey in the way that they're supposed to do this. So he's not doing it the way God dictated. So it's easy for us to look at that and say, he's not doing it, he's not serving God the way God said. And yet today, people go and they make their own rules on how to serve God, and they don't make that connection that God has dictated how we are to serve him, and yet people want to do it their own way, the way they want to do it, instead of the way God wants to do it. So you're not serving God by disobeying God.
One of the issues we try to speak on often is the issue of authority, and there is a great application for authority here in this. And you take it upon yourself to do something either you want to do or you think will be good and the Lord will accept it. You better make sure you've got a book, chapter, and verse to authorize that. You better make sure the Lord told you to do it. Uzziah, stricken for the rest of his life with an awful disease, changed your whole life if you got that little white patch on your forehead, and it is over for you. You're persona non grata in the temple and most public places.
And one of the things that's so interesting about leprosy is it seems like, particularly in the New Testament, that God uses the disease of leprosy to symbolize sin. So King Uzziah sinned by trying to offer incense and do the job of the priest, which God had dictated. God didn't say, don't do that. God said, here's how you're to do that. And he went and did it a different way.
Mhm.
And so the symbolism behind the leprosy is it represents sin. And so to your point, for the rest of his life, he symbolized sin because he was separated from everybody else by his sin, by his leprosy.
That's right. Turn back to 2 Kings 15 now. That whole chapter, 2 Chronicles 26, is talking about what 2 Kings 15 talks about in the first 8 verses, okay? The first 7 verses. It gives us a lot more information about Uzziah or Azariah, as the 2 Kings refers to him. So, now we're going to jump over to Israel. And that's where it's nice to have this thing, because we're going to be jumping back and forth. If you can track it on there, you're in good shape. The 38th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Zechariah, the son of Jeroboam, reigned over Israel in Samaria 6 months. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, as his fathers had done. He didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin. Shallum, the son of Jabesh, conspired against him and struck him down at Iblim and put him to death and reigned in his place. So, in a short period of time, a conspirator rises up, kills the king, and takes the throne. So this is a chaotic event. This is turmoil in the kingdom for this kind of stuff to be happening. And so once that's said, there's evidently nothing else, huge to talk about. In verse 11, they get with the wrap-up. The rest of the deeds of Zechariah, behold, they're written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. But it does say there, it punctuates what just happened, and you can miss this if you don't see. Look at what it says back in 2 Kings 10. This is after Jehu had done what he was supposed to do, wiping out Ahab and Jezebel and their children, and really then wiping out the center of Baal worship in the nation. The Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in carrying out what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the 4th generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. And this wasn't conditional on how they did. They didn't have to be good for this promise to be fulfilled. God just said, you're going to have 4 generations after you on the throne. And so you see, Jehoahaz, Jehoash, Jeroboam II, Zechariah, those are the 4 that God said would come. And so in 2 Kings chapter 15 and verse 12, it's just a note in passing. God said it was going to happen, and it happened. So we get a kind of a wrap up there. That verse again here in 2 Kings 10:30. Moving on just a couple more verses, at that time, it's said that in those days, the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel. So things, even from that time, were starting to fall off, and portions of the, outstretches of the kingdom of Israel are getting taken away and occupied by somebody else. And so that's going to continue here until it just is all going to get shut down. Well, that's through 2 Kings 15 and verse 12. Now, Shallum. Shallum, the son of Jabesh, began to reign in the 39th year of Uzziah, king of Judah. And do you see what we're doing? We followed through in Judah using 2 Chronicles 26. all through his reign. But now we've gone back a little bit. We're showing that during his reign, these transitions were happening over in Israel. It's just the way they tell it. I think it's a little easier than interrupting the story of Uzziah to get these chronologically when they come up. But he reigned 1 month. This is a super short period of time. Of course, he was the guy that killed the king before him, so you'd think he'd have a target on his back. But Menahem, the son of Gadi, came up from Tirzah and came to Samaria. He struck down Shallum, the son of Jabesh, in Samaria, put him to death, and reigned in his place. So now we've got the same thing happening again. Kill the king, become the king. That's the way it's going now. And as soon as that's said, of course it was only a month, so the rest of the deeds of Shallum, conspiracy that he made, behold, they're written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. It says, at that time, Menahem sacked Tifsah, and all who were in it and its territory from Tirzah on, because they did not open it to him. Therefore he sacked it, and gross, he ripped open all the women in it who were pregnant. Just what kind of a person sees that as an appropriate thing to do? Go into a place and every pregnant woman rip open and, of course, kill them and kill the child. That's just an awful commentary on Menahem. In the 39th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Menahem, the son of Gadi, began to reign over Israel. He reigned 10 years, so it slows down a little bit here. This assassination pattern slows. Of course, he did evil. We never had a good king in Israel. In verse 18, he did not depart all his days from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. But we've got this mention of a king that's starting to come in, and he's going to be kind of famous. And so sometimes it'll refer to him as Pul, and sometimes as Tiglath-Pileser the third. And so just equate those two in your mind as you're going back and forth. Pul, king of Assyria, came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver that he might help to confirm his hold on the royal power. So the reason he's spared at this point is he pays big time. And he gets that money from the wealthy man. Menahem, verse 20, exacted the money from the wealthy men, 50 shekels of silver from every wealthy man, to give to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria turned back and did not stay there in the land. Now the rest of the deeds of Menahem, all that he did, are they not written? This formal ending to every reign we see there. All right, second to the last king, Pekahiah. In verse 23, in the 50th year of Uzziah, king of Judah, Pekahiah, the son of Menahem, began to reign over Israel and Samaria. He reigned 2 years, did what was evil, didn't turn away from the sins of Jeroboam. Pekah, the son of Remaliah, his captain, conspired against him with 50 men of the people of Gilead, struck him down in Samaria, in the citadel of the king's house, with Argob and Uriah. He put him to death and reigned in his place. So we had a little relief from this, but here it goes again. Kill the king, reign in his place. And that's what happens to Pekahiah. It seems like Pekahiah and Pekah would be related, with their names being so similar, but evidently not. And that formal closing in verse 26 brings us to the last king of Israel. In the 52nd year of Azariah, king of Judah, Pekah, the son of Remaliah, began to reign over Israel and Samaria. He reigned 20 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam. You see the pattern here, introducing every one of these evil kings. Say the same thing. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, came and captured Ijon, Abel Beth-Maachah, Genoa, Kadesh, Hazor, Gilead, and Galilee, all the lands of Naphtali, and he carried the people captive to Assyria. So now he's just taken a big chunk out of the kingdom. He's, probably half of the kingdom is gone at this point. Then Hoshea, the son of Elah, made a conspiracy against Pekah, the son of Remaliah, struck him down, put him to death, and reigned in his place in the 20th year of Jotham, the son of Uzziah. The rest of the acts of Pekah and all that he did, behold, they're written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. So, it's a real quick run through all these kings here at the end. What is it, the last 50 years? 50 years, there's a lot of conspiracy, a lot of murder of the king, taking his place, doing terrible things. It's really fallen apart. Remember, there's never been a righteous king in Israel. They've come a long way. In just a few hundred years, they're way far off the mark. And that's going to be it for them. All right, let's go to 2 Kings. We're still in 2 Kings, but verses 32 and following to the end of the chapter tells us about Jotham, and this is back in Judah now. We've jumped back into Judah, and 2 Chronicles 27, pretty short chapter. It'll tell us a little bit more about him, but we get most of what we need from here in 2 Kings 15. In the second year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that his father Uzziah had done. Nevertheless, the high places were not removed. The people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. He built the upper gate of the house of the Lord. Now the rest of the acts of Jotham, all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? In those days the Lord began to send Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, against Judah. So now Judah is getting nibbled at on the edges, and they're starting to lose ground as well. Excuse me for this cough. I must be speaking incorrectly tonight, irritating my throat. Back to 2 Chronicles 27. In verse 4, 2 Chronicles 27, verse 4, moreover, he built cities in the hill country of Judah and forts and towers on the wooded hills. So this is just telling us some things that he did that didn't get mentioned back at 2 Kings. He fought with the king of the Ammonites, prevailed against them, and the Ammonites gave him that year 100 talents of silver and 10,000 cores of wheat, 10,000 of barley. The Ammonites paid him the same amount in the second and third years, so Jotham became mighty. Because, this is always what Chronicles, the point that Chronicles is trying to make, he became mighty because he ordered his ways before the Lord his God. It just wants to drive that home all the time. When you turn and serve the Lord and submit to him, good things happen. And when you turn away from him, bad things happen. It's a real simple message from 2 Chronicles. Jotham, in verse 9, slept with his fathers. They buried him in the city of David, and Ahaz, his son, reigned in his place. All right, that's kind of a crazy run through 2 Kings chapter 15. And we're pretty well wrapped up what's going to happen except the fall itself for Israel. We're real close to the end at this point. So back to the timeline. The last king, Hoshea, we'll talk about him next time, but we're real close to 722. The Assyrian captivity is about to happen. And that'll be in chapter 17. Chapter 16 for next time will be in Judah. Okay, questions, comments, and all of that. You can. It's an amazing lesson, the power of an individual, the power of one person to influence others for good or evil. It's really an amazing theme of the scriptures. I don't know if you look at the trivia questions before we're getting started on Wednesday nights, but one of them tonight was, which prophet took a cloak of a powerful man and cut it into 12 pieces? And so that was the question. But the powerful man was Jeroboam. And then he gave him 10 pieces of the 12 and said, this is how many tribes God's going to give you. But when he said that, he said, if you continue to do my will, things will be all right with you. The same message we hear coming through pounded in 2nd Chronicles. But Jeroboam instead comes up with the first state-run religion, really. I'm just going to do this, create these 2 golden calves and set them up so people don't go to Jerusalem anymore. I don't want them to do that. It's an old error going all the way back to Mount Sinai when Moses was tarrying up on the mount. Brought terrible consequences then, but he freely does that. He takes them in one fell swoop completely away from the Lord, and they never recovered. Not one king of Israel recovered from what he did. And that's why I think he gets mentioned so frequently. He never departed from the ways of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who taught Israel to sin. And he did, and they stayed with it consistently. And it's a terrible legacy to have.
We often talk about the influence a parent can have on the family, whether it's a mother or a father. Fathers typically can have a greater influence in some ways based on some behaviors, but certainly you look at this, and because one person, I know there were some family changes, but because one person set such a bad example, and they didn't teach those that came behind them. They were bad, and then they were bad, and then they were bad. And you just think about the lost generations, and it really makes you then sort of reflect on your own life and think about, what kind of example am I going to set? Because there could be generations behind me that, everybody's responsible for their own behavior. I get it, but you sure don't want to put your kids and grandkids in a position where you're making it exceptionally hard for them to do right. That's just a really powerful consequence.
Yeah. A lot of, I guess, frequently I admonish or encourage people to have the longest term view that they can of, where is this going? Jeroboam, have you thought about where the kingdom's going to wind up if you do this thing, if you set up these golden calves? Where do you think it's going to be in 400 years, 300 years? It's going to be an absolute mess if you live that way. And here it plays out with assassinations and killing people in brutal ways and just awful things. It could have been very different, I'm sure, if he could have just been obedient to the Lord. But
And he did that out of selfishness because he said, if I don't do this, then the people are going to go back to Judah to worship God at the temple like they're supposed to do, and I'll lose control over them. So it was totally selfishness on his part, despite the fact that God told him if he did right, God would continue his dynasty. So it's just totally selfishness. And I think today we see that among families. We see people, one of the parents has an affair, or they get involved in drugs or booze or whatever, and it's just selfishness. It's just, people doing what they want to do, and not, like you said, not, hey, where's my family going to be in 10 years, 20 years, 2 generations, 3 generations? What's this going to do? We don't think about that. We just think about me, me, me.
Scriptures tell us, he who troubles his own house will inherit the wind. And, phrases like that. And so, yikes. How many of you have read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis? Anybody? A really fascinating book. The way C.S. Lewis writes this, he sees that there's a young demon who's got charge of a fella and he's trying to get him to go to hell, and he's getting advice from a higher powered demon, or I guess a lower demon, called Screwtape, who writes to Wormwood and gives him advice about how to turn this guy away from the Lord. And so it's kind of like looking into the devil's playbook for how he turns us away, and it gives us, an edge so we can watch out for those things. So it's a clever book, been around for a long time. But in one place in there, Screwtape says to Wormwood, you know that our Father below in his laboratories has never come up with anything that humans like. All we can do is take the good things created by the fellow above and turn them to our own purposes. And I thought that was such a clever way to talk about what Satan does with sin. He packages it up, he finds some good thing, and then, uses it for a cross purpose, a wrong purpose, promising that there'll be some good result out of it. And of course, sin just takes you the direction you don't want to go, further than you want to go, and for longer than you want to go generally. So
You see that in the temptations of Jesus, the 3 things that he was tempted with. Food. There's nothing wrong with food, but, Satan turned it against God in a way, and, the kingdoms of the earth, God had already promised Jesus that, but basically Satan was offering it to him a different way. He wouldn't have to suffer. Satan would just give it to him. So it's a great, great point that Lewis made in that.
yeah, he did it cleverly too. So
I feel like the people in the Bible, like in Uzziah, like they really messed up their lives to where, Satan is taking over, their lives and everything. But we also have to realize that God is up here and he's controlling what people are doing in the Bible, and we have to realize that we have to just face Satan every time he comes in.
2 Chronicles 26:5. Remember that as a takeaway from tonight's lesson. He set himself to seek God in the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. And as long as he sought the Lord, God made him prosper. And the other one is the flip side when it turned, the tables turned in verse 16. When he was strong, he grew proud to his destruction. And so, watch that. You know, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And both in the parable of the sower, the second and third scenarios are about folks who make a great start and then lose it somewhere. Maybe quickly because somebody said something that made them feel uncomfortable, or they just get distracted living their life or pursuing riches. There's all sorts of ways to start and not get there. That's why so many of those letters in the book of Revelation, hold fast. He who overcomes, be faithful till the end. It's what we're out, it's what we're about. It's why we're here. It's what we're trying to do. When we study these old folks from long, long ago, we're trying to see the pratfalls and the pitfalls that they had and avoid them. So, it's encouraging to be together. And that's a big part of this, but then also gain some knowledge so that we're not going to fall for the things Satan's going to try to do to us. All right. For next time, week from tonight, it'll be 2 Kings 16 and 2 Chronicles 28. So we'll be doing that for next time. Any final comments? Okay, did you read it the second time, Scott? Yeah, thanks, okay. So let's just go ahead and take a couple of minutes till we start. And
Thank you.
you're welcome. Love and certain shirts covering which we Stop.
Okay, I think most of us are in the auditorium. We may be missing one or two, but if you will, go ahead and, in fact, let's mark the song of invitation first so I don't forget, please. 822 would be the song of invitation. If you want to put your marker there. And at this time, we'll sing number 412, 412. One of the little girls in the congregation in North Tampa used to call this the sinking sand song, because all other ground is sinking sand. Can we sing the sinking sand song? So that's what we're singing tonight. Let's all sing out. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils his lovely face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in him be found, dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand.
Let's back this up a little bit, keep you out of the splash zone. All right. So, for whatever reason, over the last 4 weeks, I guess, maybe it's just the types of media I consume, but I keep seeing these references to and stories about the Medal of Honor. So I thought I'd talk tonight a little bit about Medal of Honor kind of in general and the bravery and sacrifice more specifically that is typically associated with this. But if you missed it, and you probably did, the week before Christmas, President Biden awarded the Medal of Honor to 3 soldiers. And as is typical with the award of the Medal of Honor, only one of them was actually still alive when the medal was presented to him. And as also is not atypical of the Medal of Honor, one of those soldiers who was presented to, actually his exploits went all the way back to 2005. And there's a reason that, well, actually, let me change that. So if you're looking for a surefire way to ever get the Medal of Honor, you ever decided you wanted to get one of those, the best and the surest way to do that is to actually throw yourself on a grenade. Having eaten at many Army dining facilities and Marine chow halls and worked out in military bases across the world, I don't think I've ever been to any of those institutions where the chow hall or the dining facility wasn't named after somebody who had not thrown themselves on a grenade. And there's a reason why so many of the Medal of Honor winners are people who have, at least in the modern era, who have thrown themselves on a grenade, because when they do the investigation to determine if somebody is worthy of our nation's highest medal for valor, they want to ensure that the person's actions was actually worthy of the ideals of what is essentially, exceptional bravery or duty beyond the call of duty. And so when it comes to doing these investigations, and it's always really hard to kind of reconstruct what at the time was very chaotic and dangerous and very confusing circumstances. But it's really easy to understand if somebody has thrown themselves on the grenade that they had that intent to sacrifice themselves and to go above and beyond the call of duty, with the exception of one case that happened back in 2004. And I was kind of familiar with this because it was turned into this little mini drama that was reported on in several issues of the Marine Corps Times. Back in 2004, there was a Marine who was in Iraq, and an Iraqi had thrown a grenade at him and his men, so he was the leader of this small unit. And so he throws himself on this grenade and winds up saving the lives of everybody else around him. And so, normally this is kind of mechanical. They say he threw himself on a grenade, he gave himself up so others can die. I mean, this is a no-brainer. So they're going through and they're doing the investigation on the circumstances of his death. And the Marine said, nope, don't give him Medal of Honor. He doesn't deserve it. And everyone's kind of shocked. I mean, I'm sure the Commandant of the Marine Corps is already getting ready, to sign this. I mean, this is a gimme. This is a softball right here. And as they're trying to say, well, he threw himself. He clearly saved the lives of those around him. Why wouldn't you award him the Medal of Honor? And they said, the Marines basically, multiple Marines in the unit who were with him there said, yeah, he may have done all that, but he wasn't brave. He was dumb. And kind of, how does this work? And so it turns out that, for these Marines who, they train together, they deploy together, spend a lot of time together, they tell each other all sorts of wild stories, as these young guys do. And this Marine had expressed his total confidence in the helmet that we had at the time. So the helmet that we had at the time, which is still much inferior to some of the newer models we have now, are made out of Kevlar, and it was his belief that this helmet would stop a grenade. And so, and he'd been arguing with fellow members of his unit for months throughout this deployment that the helmet could stop a grenade. And if you're familiar with physics or the properties of grenades, that ain't even close. I mean, you cannot wear enough material on your head. Your neck couldn't take it. That could protect you from the blast of a grenade. And so they had said, he wasn't brave, he was just kind of ignorant. He had an undue confidence in this helmet, and apparently that's what he did. When someone threw the grenade at his unit, he took off his helmet, covered the grenade with it, and died very quickly, apparently. But I bring up this story because it illustrates a very important phenomena and a couple of important points. The first one, of course, is that there's a very fine line between bravery and foolishness. But the other, and the more important point, was what the other young Marines around him clearly saw, that when you don't intend to sacrifice yourself, well, it's really not a sacrifice. It's really not an act of bravery. He's on the wrong side of the line between bravery and foolishness. And you have to agree with him. When somebody doesn't intend to sacrifice themselves, I think we'd all agree with the other members of his unit that, this doesn't count. This wasn't bravery. It's not sacrifice because he didn't intend to do it. The Marine Corps gave him the Medal of Honor anyway. But I mean, if for no other reason, he did actually, wittingly or unwittingly, he did save the lives of those around him. But I bring up this story to make that point about the nature of sacrifice, and hopefully it gives us maybe a little more insight into the nature of the sacrifice made on our behalf by the Lord. And so, but actually I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit. So so the Marine Corps went ahead and gave him the Medal of Honor, deciding that he really did sacrifice, and they just really couldn't make a real judgment really about his motives. So they just went ahead and gave it to him anyway, because the end result, I guess, was still the same. But I'm not sure that any of those people in those kind of situations ever can fully make that decision about whether they're sacrificing themselves or not. So in my own work, I happen to know that a US-made grenade has a fuse time. So once you pull the pin, release the spoon, you have a time of 4 to 5 seconds before it explodes. To me, I think that level of variability is just a little too high. That's like 25% if you're going off the base case of 4. But, so that means 4 to 5 seconds is what it takes. So when you see a grenade kind of bouncing in your direction, that means you've got about 2 seconds, really, to make a decision if you're going to make yourself a sacrifice or if you're going to make yourself way to cover. Does anybody really ever, make a decision like that in that brief of a time? Probably not. They just react on the various stimuli that are around them at the time. But like I said, I use this example as a way to help us maybe fully appreciate more that sacrifice that the Lord himself made. And because unlike those Medal of Honor winners, who I think in all cases had basically made a split-second decision without, all the information they needed at that time to make that decision. But the Lord, on the other hand, did not make a split-second decision when he decided to give himself up as a sacrifice. He didn't make a split day, a split week, a split month. He actually had a lot of time to think about what it was he was doing. And in Matthew chapter 16, it's actually verse 21. It's only a single verse, so I'll read it to you so you don't have to turn over there. But in Matthew chapter 16, verse 21, this is where the story, the Gospel of Matthew, I think really pivots or makes a turn. And I think the tone after verse 21 is really kind of different than the writing up to this point. Because at this point in verse 21 is when Jesus reveals to his disciples that he is going to leave them. He's going to die. He's going to be made a sacrifice. And in verse 21 in Matthew chapter 16, it reads, "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day raised to life." And so when I say Jesus didn't make a split decision, this was no, arbitrary, seat of the pants, split-second decision. Most scholars, I think, responsible scholars who respect God's word, they believe that at this point, this is about 6 months prior to Jesus going to Jerusalem and becoming that sacrifice. And so if you can imagine for 6 months knowing that you are going to be made a human sacrifice in a relatively short period of time, that has got to weigh on everything that you think and do. Every time you get up in the morning and every time Jesus went to sleep at night, this knowing that he was going to be made a human sacrifice had to weigh very heavily on his mind. I remember when I was a very young kid and my mom told me we were going to the doctor, I had to get a shot. I mean, that just ruined my day. I mean, the fear and the anguish when I was very young, knowing that I was going to get what is really a truly minor, truly minor annoyance or not even measure of true pain. But I couldn't think anything else all day. I think my dogs are like that too. If they figure out they're going to the vet, they are, they pretty much have the same reaction. But imagine 6 months knowing that this was going to happen to you. And remember, when Jesus is speaking these words to his disciples, he's up in Galilee. He's got to go down to, he has to walk himself down to his own execution. And you can only imagine, with each step, you're taking we'd say up to Jerusalem, if you're going to be consistent with the Bible writers. But as he was making his way from Galilee down to Jerusalem, every step he took, was a conscious decision that he was going to obey God's will and to make himself a human sacrifice. So again, this was, of all the most deliberate decisions in the world, this has got to rank right up there with him as he goes through this 6 months of obedience, to the will of the Father. And not only did Jesus know that this sacrifice was going to happen, he seemed to fully understand the magnitude of the pain and suffering that he was going to endure. While he was at Gethsemane the night before he was going to be crucified, he took Peter and 2 others and tells them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me." Then he proceeded to ask the Father 3 times that if this sacrifice, this responsibility for the sacrifice could be taken away from him. And the book of Luke relates that that while he was praying, that we would say, I guess in modern terms, that he was under a tremendous amount of stress. And it says that while he was praying, that his sweat became drops of blood, indicating that he fully understood exactly what it was that was going to happen to him. And then the last aspect I'd like you to consider about Jesus offering himself as a sacrifice is that he was in control of this process the whole time. I've been currently reading a book called Last Stands, When Men Fight When All Is Lost, and it's really more of a book about men who are willing to heroically, give up their lives in battle. And as the title implies, it's when all is lost. And basically what the author concludes is he goes through a series of famous battles, starting with the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, and I think probably the last one might have been Custer's Last Stand, talks about the Alamo. But in all those cases, those men who fought valiantly into the death, well, they didn't really have much of a choice because they were all in positions where they were surrounded and they couldn't leave. They didn't have a choice. In the case of the Alamo, which, if you ever watch the movie, you might think this was really some big, large-scale battle, but it was 189 dudes in what is a really small building. I'm pretty sure I could throw a rock over the walls of the Alamo, and I can't throw very far. And so basically 45 guys on a wall who are fighting an army of several thousand professional Mexican soldiers who had a tremendous amount of artillery. And although at the beginning of this battle, when the Mexican army was just showing up, some of them could have exfiltrated out through the lines and made it. But there came to be a point where, several thousand men around a 80 by 80 building, they had completely sealed off that perimeter, and nobody could leave. And at that point, Santa Anna, the Mexican general, said, not only can you not leave, none of you can surrender, because I will accept none of your surrender. I'm going to kill you if you surrender. So they really had no choice, and they fought to the end. But Jesus was in control of that situation. Jesus could have called in for reinforcements, right? We know later in Genesis, or Matthew chapter 26, we were talking about Genesis in class, Jesus could have called it all off. He could have called in for reinforcements, and in Matthew 26, Peter tries to stop the crucifixion from going forward by attacking the people who had come to arrest Jesus. And Jesus tells him to put his sword away and to stop because he doesn't really need Peter's help. He says he could have called 12 legions of angels if he wanted help to stop this. And I don't know exactly what type of legion Jesus was referring to, but if he's talking about a Roman legion, that's 5,000. That's a little over 5,000 men. So you're talking about, he said, I could call 60,000 angels right now, and we can take care of this whole situation. But he specifically chose not to do that. So as we close our time together this evening, while we can't always say that the men that we hold up as examples of bravery and sacrifice necessarily always meant to achieve or fully fulfill that impression that we may have of them, but many of them probably didn't fully understand what they were doing and, made decisions in split seconds that, they just really weren't equipped to make at that time. But we can say with absolute certainty that when it comes to our Lord, there has never been a person who has made a sacrifice like Jesus, who fully understood well in advance and had time to fully contemplate the sacrifice he was making, understood the pain and the magnitude of what he was going to endure, and had the ability to actually stop it all. So if there's anyone present this evening who up to this point has not fully appreciated the magnitude of that sacrifice that Jesus has made on our behalf and would like to come forward and to put on Christ and to accept that sacrifice in baptism, then we invite you to come forward now as we stand and sing our closing song.
God is calling the prodigal, come without delay. Hear, oh, hear him calling, calling now for thee. Though you've wandered so far from his presence, come today.
Hear his loving voice calling still. Calling now for thee, O weary prodigal, come. Calling now for thee, O weary prodigal, come. Patient, loving, and tenderly still the Father pleads. Hear, O hear him calling, calling now for thee. O return while the Spirit in mercy intercedes. Hear his loving voice calling still. Calling now for thee, O weary prodigal, come. Calling now for thee, O weary prodigal, come. Come, there's bread in the house of the Father, and to spare. Hear, O hear him calling, calling now for thee. Lo, the table is spread and the feast is waiting there. Hear his loving voice calling still. Calling now for thee, O weary prodigal, come. Calling now for thee, O weary prodigal, come. Appreciate the presence of each person here this evening. Appreciate the good thoughts there, Greg, and interesting things to contemplate, and certainly in light of the sacrifices that Jesus made in giving himself and laying down his life for us. I don't know of any other announcements at this time, so we'll go to God in prayer and then we'll be dismissed.
Father in heaven, we thank you for this day and all the blessings in this life, Father. We thank you for this evening study that we've been able to come together and learn of you, and we hope and pray that the things we've talked about and learned about are in accordance with your word. And as you have asked us to do these things, be with us as we continue throughout this week